Good morning, and happy Valentine's Day, metalheads of the internet. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. I want you to go grab some red wine and some heart-shaped candies and chocolates, maybe light some candles and turn the lights down real low, because today, we are going to talk about some of the most romantic metal albums ever made. With previous Valentine's Day themed videos, we've talked about some of the sexiest metal albums of all time, some of the hottest metal musicians out there writing and recording and performing at this very moment, or perhaps in the past, or whatever else have you, and that was all fine and cool and good, don't get me wrong. But Valentine's Day isn't really about sex, it's arguably an ingredient, especially if you have a very good Valentine's Day, but not the primary one. Valentine's Day, at least as we know it today, is about embracing and appreciating love and passion and romance. So I thought, you know what, let's use this opportunity to talk about some of the most romantic metal albums of all time. I'm not necessarily talking about albums that are chock full of big, emotive power ballads or anything like that. I'm not necessarily talking about bands that always talk about love and romance and heartbreak and whatever else have you. I'm talking about albums that genuinely ooze passion and romance. Also, here's a fun little drinking game you can play on the side if you like, with a loved one, with a partner or spouse. Take a shot every time we mention gothic metal or death doom, because apparently these genres are just chock full of romance. They excel in creating and crapping out romantic stuff. Alright, first up we have Lita from Lita Ford, released in February 1988 via RCA Records, and I know what some of you are thinking right now, right off the bat. Hey, Robert, a moment ago you were talking about death doom and gothic metal, and you're opening things up with this cheesy, corny, dated 80s hair metal, pop metal record from Lita fucking Ford. What the fuck are you doing, bro? And I understand that, but just let me cook for a minute, alright? Like, I've only just turned on the fucking oven. You gotta give me a moment to fucking cook before you complain I've done it wrong, alright? Alright? Calm down. I feel like this record just really captures the fun, bright, bubbly side of romance and falling in love and being in love. Songs like Fatal Passion, Back to the Cave, and especially Kiss Me Deadly are just so charming and playful and maybe a little sleazy, but in an appropriate kind of way, you know? Like, they're just fun, and sure, romance can be very heavy and powerful, but it can also be fun. I mean, if you're not having fun with the person you love, then what the fuck are you doing with your life, man? And you also have songs like Falling In and Out of Love and Broken Dreams, which really capture this feeling of, like, passion and heartache in a way that's still really appealing. And of course, you have one of the most iconic metal ballads on here, Close My Eyes Forever, featuring Ozzy Osbourne. It's a very tender and intimate ballad with a bit of a dark edge as well, something that captures, like, the hardships of being in, like, a real heavy relationship. This probably wouldn't be the soundtrack to a romantic steak, lobster, and red wine dinner, but fuck it, you know? Me and Anna with a six-pack of beer, just kind of dancing in our apartment, watching goofy movies. I think this works just fine, bro. Next up, we have Elysium from Fields of the Nephilim, released in September 1990 via Beggar's Banquet. I'm probably cheating a little bit with this one because it's not really a metal record. It is a gothic rock record. I would argue, though, with heavier soundscapes and atmospheres and even more hard rock, metal-oriented riffage and instrumentation all throughout, it is also worth noting that Fields of the Nephilim were a huge influence on gothic metal. This album in particular, there's a lot of stuff happening here that, you know, I can kind of see in, like, what Paradise Lost were doing in the mid-90s. So I have decided to argue that this thing is just metal enough to make the cut, and if anyone doesn't like that, too fucking bad. My list, my video, my rules. Make your own fucking list. I don't give a shit. Romance, love, heartache, passion are by no means uncommon themes within the realms of goth music and gothic rock and gothic metal, but there are some bands who do it better than others, and I think Fields of the Nephilim is one of the best, and of everything they did, this album probably is their strongest and their most cohesive in my opinion. What I love about this album is that even in its biggest and its most expansive and consuming moments, with like moaning, howling, overpowering vocals and atmospheric textures and huge guitar passages. Like, it still feels really intimate and close. Like, Carl McCoy is singing, like, directly to me. Like, we're face to face. He's speaking to me. And that really helps in creating the romantic connection, I guess you could say, to this album. Like, this thing just oozes passion in so many different ways. It is so big, but also still so intimate. Like strings and synthesizers and moaning vocals and guitars and Carl McCoy's like impassionate, anguished vocals across the record. It's just really powerful stuff. And there's a lot they kind of do within this to communicate different kinds of love and heartache and passion and such. For Her Light, for instance, feels more bittersweet, whereas At the Gates of Silent Memory is more mournful. I would also like to add, this is probably one of my favorite like goth rock records out there. Like, it's not a genre I spend a ton of time with, but I've come to really enjoy and appreciate this album, and I look forward to hopefully one day having it on vinyl. Okay, we've reached that point in the video where we're talking about a couple of different albums from the same one band, and we're doing that because I feel like all of these albums fit the criteria that I'm looking for, and they're all great, and I want to talk about them all, so fuck you. We're talking about Anathema, namely the albums Serenades, released in February 1993, and Eternity, released in November 1996, both via Peaceville Records. These records are sonically quite different from each other, with Serenades being more of a Deaf Doom release. It has a more raw, like grisly kind of sound with a heavy emphasis on guttural vocals and slow-paced riffage, whereas Eternity is a little bit more spacious and clean with more heavenly, melancholic, clean vocals. However, both of these records, I think, communicate the same amount of like dread and longing and heartache and passion that I'm kind of looking for right now in this video. For different reasons and through different means, but even so. With Serenade specifically, there's a dirtiness and a grittiness and a darkness to this record that is contrasted with more heartfelt, melodic, and melancholic moments that I find really appealing. Lovelorn Rhapsody, Sweet Tears, They Will Always Die are a great example of what I'm talking about. Even interluding cuts like J'ai fait une promesse, I definitely butchered that pronunciation, I'm so sorry. But that's a beautiful interlude, like these like soaring, angelic, clean vocals with some very minimalistic guitar work. That's romantic. That's great. And as far as Eternity is concerned, I mean, I just straight up think this is just a full-on beautiful album. I mean, acoustic guitars and pianos and string instruments working in harmony with like gothic rock and doom metal influences and soundscapes and riffs. The two-part title track, Eternity especially, I mean, I love its spacious moments, I love its more progressive moments. I mean, years later, this is still one of the best things I think Anathema ever put out. I also kind of want to give a shout out briefly to Weather Systems, released in 2012. Anathema is well into their like alternative rock, progressive rock, symphonic rock kind of stage at this point, and I think this album is the best of this era, and the first few tracks especially are just stunning. Next up, we once again have a couple of albums released from one band. Bloody Kisses, released in August 1993, and October Rust, released in August 1996, both via Roadrunner Records, and both by Type O Negative. Now, there's a lot to talk about and consider when it comes to the lyrical themes and content of a Type O Negative album. I mean, you know, there's a lot of like edgy, racy, controversial satire and humor all throughout the Type O Negative discography. Near the end of their career, like there's more doom and misery on display. I think these albums do a good job at kind of balancing and toning down like the edgier aspects of Type O Negative's like lyrical style and bringing in like more romantic and seductive kind of sounds and elements. More synthesizers, more deep groaning, moaning vocals, slow-paced arrangements, and like certain textures and ideas as well. I mean, on Bloody Kisses, you of course have the title track, and Can't Lose You, and Christian Woman. And on October Rush, you have Love You to Death, Be My Druidess, the cover of Cinnamon Girl. as well as My Girlfriend's Girlfriend, Die With Me, Burnt Flowers, Fallen in Praise of Bacchus. I would definitely say that October Rust is the more romantic of these albums, but my wife Anna has a soft spot for Bloody Kisses over October Rust, so I figured, fuck it, I'll throw it in here too. It meets the criteria as well. I mean, that album cover especially, like, there's definitely a lot of romance communicated there, eh? Say what you will of Peter Steele, he was a very complicated and a very weird man, but he definitely knew how to communicate, like, passion and agony and heartache and love through sound, even if it was, you know, mixed in with a bunch of fucking weird nonsense. Even if it was mixed in with cuts like, you know, Kill All the White People. Although I like that fucking song. That's kind of a banger. Alright, y'all know the drill by now. It's a 2 albums, 1 band kind of thing, you know? We're talking about a couple of albums next from My Dying Bride, namely The Angel and the Dark River, released in May 1995, and Like Gods of the Sun, released in September 1996, both via Peaceville Records. My Dying Bride, even more so than Anathema and Paradise Lost, have a very mournful, miserable kind of like sound and vibe and feel and take on like doom metal and gothic metal. There's a very heavy emphasis lyrically on religious symbolism and relationship issues and problems, and in general it just has like a very sad kind of sound. Like, there's a lot of violin and keyboard, and there's a lot more gloom and agony, but I think it's still effectively romantic because it is so honest and open. Like, there's a lot of fucking heart and emotion here. The Angel in the Dark River has a more stripped down kind of sound overall that makes it really easy to get in and connect with everything that's happening. Songs like The Cry of Mankind, From Darkest Skies, A Sea to Suffer In, they're genuinely really beautiful, even if in like this like agonizing, heartbroken kind of way. Like Gods of the Sun, by comparison, is more lush and more evocative. It plays around with similar themes, but it has a bigger sound, and it also introduces influences from, like, classic English poetry. There's a heavier emphasis on, like, violin and keyboard and synth work. In fact, For My Fallen Angel is almost entirely an orchestral piece, and a pretty beautiful one at that. And I mean, stuff like A Kiss to Remember and For You, I mean, it's really, really, really stunning shit as well. Alright, we've got one more kind of scenario where we're talking about a couple of albums from one band. It's the last one, I promise you. We're talking about a couple of albums from Cradle of Filth, namely Dusk and Her Embrace, released in August of 1996, and Cruelty and the Beast, released in May 1998, both via Music for Nations. Cradle of Filth is kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas and themes, so much so it's been consistently difficult to kind of lock them into like a genre category. There's symphonic metal in the mix, death metal, second wave black metal, death rock, gothic metal, influences lyrically, thematically, conceptually, from like vampire lore and mythology from the works of H.P. Lovecraft, as well as classic English literature and poetry, classic Gothic literature and poetry. One of the albums we're talking about right now, Cruelty and the Beast, is also further inspired by the legend of Elizabeth Bathory. And since we're on the topic, let's actually talk about Cruelty and the Beast. This is a very, like, gruesome record. It is a very bloodthirsty record. It's a very malicious record. You have this kind of, like, lo-fi, grainy black metal guitar sound with, like, piercing percussion and, like, screaming vocals and, like, operatic clean vocals as well. Brief sections of, like, neoclassical as well, atmospheric soundscapes, gothic rock, post-punk kind of ish soundscapes as well, thrown into the mix. It's a very bombastic and eclectic record for sure. But I do think there's something like really effective and powerful about the combination of these sounds and ideas. Put very simply, there's a reason why edgy metal goth girls love Cradle of Filth. Like, it is very creepy and eerie and brutal, but it also does still communicate a lot of passion. Especially, I would say, on cuts like Bathory Aria, Cruelty Brought These Orchids, Beneath These Howling Stars. Dusk in Her Embrace is able to kind of capture that same feel despite being sonically and thematically a lot different. It's not as high concept. It's also a lot more abrasive and raw. Like, this has more in common with a full-on, like, late 90s kind of, like, atmospheric symphonic black metal record. But there is still, like, romance and passion communicated through cuts like A Gothic Romance, the title track, The Graveyard by Moonlight, Beauty Slept in Sodom, even if it is admittedly a much more morbid and grotesque kind of romance and passion. Okay, we're back to talking about just one album from just one band, and that's a good thing because I want to spend a bit of time actually dissecting this next one with you. We're talking about Ordinary Corrupt Human Love from Deafheaven, released in July 2018 via Anti-Minus and Republic. Y'all should already know how I feel about Deafheaven, and in particular how I feel about their 2013 magnum opus, Sunbather. Just in case you don't, I recommend you check out a video I did called The Legacy of Sunbather, blah, 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 blah. However, I'm choosing Ordinary Corrupt Human Love over Sunbather because it is lyrically and thematically more relevant to today's conversation, and I also feel, from the perspective of love and romance and passion, maybe more effective. Sunbather was a more introspective record that also dealt with broad social issues, whereas Ordinary Corrupt Human Love is a more intimate, bitter, and gentle kind of record, experimenting with alternative rock and like classic emo post-hardcore progressions, and bringing that into like black gaze and experimental black metal. From what I understand, a big inspiration from this album was the English novel The End of the Affair, set in London during and just after the Second World War. The novel examines the obsessions, jealousy, and discernments within the relationships between three central characters: writer Maurice Bendrix, Sarah Miles, and her husband, civil servant Henry Miles. It's also worth noting that with this album coming hot off the heels of Near Bermuda and a lot of like changes within the band, people coming and going, dealing with sobriety and battling addiction, all that absolutely also has an impact on this album, as people were kind of reconnecting with loved ones and kind of re-examining their lives. The result is something that is very moving and sharp and poignant. This album is, at least as I see it, about the connections that we have to each other, the connections and the relationships that we have with people that we love in our lives. It is simultaneously a very ambitious and simplistic record in a lot of ways, and that allows it to be very rich and immersive and cinematic. It's easy to kind of get into, and it's easy to then, once you're into this album, dissect and digest everything that's happening and really analyze it and really build an emotional connection and bond. Plus, also, just arguably a masterpiece of a record. Like, I would probably give this a 5 out of 5 if we were to review it today. Next up, we have Mana from Unto Others, or if you prefer, Idle Hands. That's the name they went by at the time of this album's release, which, by the way, was May 2019 via Eisenwald. This thing just oozes like mysterious gothic charm and personality and passion and romance. Every single song sounds like Gabriel really trying to like savor this kind of like undying romance or passion, or trying really hard to communicate. It has this real sense of like longing and like pain consistently through. Songs like Jackie, Dragon, Why Do You Cry, Don't Waste Your Time, A Single Solemn Rose, It'll Be Over Before You Know It. I mean, it's just so lyrically tender and open, and it's complemented so well by like this really great mixture of like classic gothic rock and gothic metal influences and hard rock and heavy metal rhythms and riffs. Like, it's equal parts The Cure and Sisters of Mercy and like Ozzy Osbourne. Every melody, chorus, hook is just so big and bold and dynamic and catchy and memorable. I mean, years later, I'm still singing along to stuff like Jackie and Give Me to the Night. The production is incredible as well. Like, it has this really lush but also ominous kind of like feel and presentation. Just a fantastic record from start to finish. This almost occupies a territory similar to that of the Lita Ford record we talked about earlier, where it's just fun. I mean, sure, this thing is lyrically also a little bit more tragic, a little bit more like agonizing in some aspects, but like the songs are just genuinely also so much fun. Next up, we have Golden Grey from Baroness, released in June 2018 2019 via Abraxan Hymns. By this point in Baroness's career, they were moving away from the more abrasive kind of like sludge metal of the Red album and the Blue album, and they were becoming a lot more progressive and incorporating influences from alternative rock and also incorporating more melodic influences into the sound as well. With this album, there was an honest effort to create more simplistic, open kind of music, more honest kind of music, but at the same time, they were also trying to incorporate more like improvised songwriting and to be more experimental and to kind of challenge themselves. And the result is an album that, for me at least, is extremely intimate. Like, I connect to this album immediately right away. I know there are a lot of complaints still now to this day about the production of the record, about how it's mixed and mastered and how noisy it can be at times and compressed. But to be honest, I still thoroughly enjoy this album like 5 years later. And I honestly think this kind of production works really well in this album's most barren and naked and most emotionally charged numbers. Like cuts like Tourniquet, I'm Already Gone, I'd Do Anything, Cold-Blooded Angels, genuinely fucking beautiful. Amazing use of acoustic guitars and like howling vocals consistently across these cuts, with sludgier progressions and riffs brought in to give everything a bit of an extra kick and spice. Romance is not necessarily a theme on this record, but I do think there is something romantic about the honesty and the passion on display here. This album floored me when it came out in 2019, and though I still thoroughly enjoy a lot of the stuff in the Baroness discography, to be honest, this maybe remains near the very tippy top for me. Like, I love this fucking record. And finally, we have Beautiful Ghost from Unrequited, released in August 2021 via Prophecy Productions. I think I actually reviewed this here on the Metal Meltdown. I think I gave it a 3 out of 5 at the time. If I were to review it today, it would get like a 4, I would say. Leaning towards a 4.5 out of 5, I would say. It's an album that's really grown on me. And the reason why is because of its extremely unique take and perspective on black gaze. It is an extremely emotive album. Sonically, it does remind me of like classic works from like Alcest and Lantlos, but this album is very much about love and romance and the waves of emotions that very much come with being in love and with romance. And as such, it can be a very upbeat, lovey-dovey kind of record. It can also be a little bit more complex. Consistently, it is full of emotion and spirit and heart, with strings and keyboards, beautiful orchestral arrangements, complementing harsh and unforgiving, like post-black metal and black gaze. Clean vocals all throughout the album as well help to bring some melancholy and atmosphere and additional, like, lovey vibes, I guess you could say, into the mix. And the result is honestly kind of stunning. Like, there's not a single cut on here that I don't think is genuinely really beautifully written and produced. I'll give a special shout out, though, to Autumn and Everlay, because I love how it combines, like, choral vocals and keyboards with this really, like, aggressive but, like, weirdly uplifting kind of, like, atmospheric black gaze and black metal, as well as the title track Beautiful Ghost for its heavy emphasis on like string and synth-driven ambience and spacious soundscapes, contrasted with like really cold black metal. And voila, there you have it. Those are some of the most romantic metal albums of all time. In my opinion, at least, it was fun to do this. It was fun to really dive deep and explore and examine the emotions behind these albums, both created intentionally by the band and emotions that I had in response to these albums. It's great. It's cool. Now it's your turn to tell me, what do you think are some of the most romantic metal albums of all time? What will you be jamming on Valentine's Day 2024? Make sure you comment, make sure you also like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Look, there's even more videos here, and as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.